It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Marla Tribich. Your maiden name was Helfgott. We're here in your beautiful apartment in London. And Marla, you come from such a distinguished family. Your brother Ben Helfgott, everybody knows, and everybody knows you. And I'm so privileged to be here in your home today. So Marla, if you could tell us a little bit about your family, the town you came from, where Rabbi Lau came from, and just a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born in Piotrków, Trybunalski, to give you the full name. And it was a very lovely town, very vibrant, a very nice Jewish community. And we had a Jewish press, which means that, you know, Sidurim were actually printed in Piotrków. Someone showed me one here in London that had been printed in Piotrków. And it was just, I go back there quite a bit with groups. And people often wonder why I do that, must be very painful. But in fact, I find it very important. I feel that I'm keeping in touch with my family, my parents, because all my memories are there, and I have such happy memories of that town and my friends and relatives and everything that went on there before the war.
And when were you born?
I was born in Piotrków.
And what, do you know the date?
Date. I was born in September 1930. And then on the, just before my 9th birthday, war broke out.
And Marla, can I just ask you, did you come from a religious family or a traditional family?
I would say traditional, yeah. Out of my parents, my mother was much more religious than my father. But we had a very Jewish home, and we lived a Jewish life.
And you had a sister?
Yes, I had a younger sister. There were 3 of us. I was the middle one of the 3. But she was killed together with my mother. Most terrible death. I never describe it. But they were killed in the forest. The forest killings at the end of 1942. It was going on all over Europe.
And Marla, what is your earliest memories, if your earliest recollections growing up?
Well, I remember my friends, and in fact one of my friends, Pema Glassman, died in Ravensbrück when we were there. And my aunt, Franja Klein, also died in Ravensbrück. We were deported from, well, we had quite a lot of war years in Piotrków, and we were invaded. They were in our town within 2 weeks of the outbreak of war, and we were the first town in Europe to have a ghetto, and it started on the 1st of November 1939. So we were really incarcerated for a very long time, because some of them started much later.
And do you remember leaving your home and going to the ghetto?
Yes, I remember that very well, and I remember ghetto life and what it was like. Lots of people came in from other towns. It was terribly overcrowded. But even in the ghetto there was a certain amount of life going on. But that was really at the beginning. But as time went on, things got worse and worse, and there was just no end to how bad it was getting. We kept saying, well, it can't get worse than that, but it always did.
And you were together as a family?
We were in the ghetto, yes, at the beginning, until 1942. We had one big room, very big room, because there was terrible overcrowding, and people had come from other towns and from around there into our ghetto. And our population, Jewish population, was 15,000. But it grew to 28,000 with all the newcomers. And then we lost about 4,000 through epidemics. And the others, the 24,000, were still in cramped conditions and people were dying. But when the deportations came, they deported 22,000 people to Treblinka. Among them, well, none of my family was among them because I was in hiding with my cousin, Ija Klein. And that was a terrible tragedy because my parents and her parents paid. Well, he was a Christian, but he was actually of German origin. And he was going to look after us during the deportations in another town in Częstochowa. And we were supposed to be safe with him. He was getting well paid for it. But my cousin Ija was an only child and she was so homesick. She wanted to go back. She was told she can't go back because the deportations were still going on. And she said that her parents have very good friends in Piotrków, Christian friends, who are hiding their valuables. And they'll take her in. So this man said, okay, I'll take you back. And that's the end of the story. I was languishing there for a very long time still, I don't know how long. But eventually the sign came to bring me back because the deportations were finished. And when I got back, we were supposed to meet in flour mill, which actually belonged to my father before the war, together with in partnership with his brother and another man. But now he was lucky to have a job there. So we came in and there was my father waiting for me, but also my uncle, Joseph Klein, Ija's father.
And he didn't know.
He looked at us and he went white. He said, where is my daughter? And the men said, I brought her back, I took her to you good friends. Well, he said, she's not there. What have you done with my child? And I still remember vividly him with his hands behind his back, looking at the ground, sort of walking there and back, pacing, saying, what have you done with my child? And that's the end of the story. Nobody knows what they did with her. And that my aunt and uncle found out. Well, my uncle was arrested soon after that with my other uncle. There were two Helfgott brothers in Piotrków and two Klein brothers, my mother's side of the family. And they arrested all of them and some other people, and they kept them in prison. And then after a little while, I don't know how long they were there, they marched them out to the Jewish cemetery. They released one Helfgott and one Klein and some other people. And that was my father was released and one of my Klein uncles. And the rest was marched to the Jewish cemetery, lined up against the wall, and they were all shot. After the war, those that survived, my aunt, one aunt who did survive, she had a stone put up for them, a memorial stone. And that's how, well, we found out from these good friends that the men came, or have I told you that before? he came with Ija and collected a suitcase full of valuables, and he left with her, and that's all. That's the end of the story. So my aunt lost her husband, her daughter and her husband, all within a very short space of time. But she survived the war, and she lived with that pain for the rest of her life.
And Marla, can I ask, when you went to Shestakova, where was your brother and your sister?
My brother had a work permit. My father, mother and sister were with 3 different Polish families. So we were, and I was in Częstochowa, so we were all safe, in inverted commas, during that period. Well, I mean, nobody was safe, but my parents survived by being outside the ghetto in hiding. But when I returned to the ghetto, I was smuggled in with the working party. There was my mother. My family was intact, but that was very unusual. Most families had been, they disappeared altogether, and there were 1 or 2 people left. They deported 22, because after the epidemics there were about 24,000 people left in the ghetto. They deported about 22,000 to Treblinka, and the 2,200 that were left, they all had jobs. There were 2 very big places outside Piotrków. One was glass works, and they employed about over 1,000 people. I mean, from the ghetto. And the other one was called Bugaj, and they did manufacture of plywood. They manufactured plywood, and they also employed about 1,100. So those 2,000 people were safe, but all the rest were deported. But newcomers came after the deportations. People came out of hiding. Some people hid in the open, and some in the sewers, and quite a few people hid during that part. So when the deportation was over, all these people started returning. All of us, my mother, my sister, my father, brother, not my brother, because he had a job and he had a card, an identity card. But the Germans knew that people were coming back out of hiding, but they didn't say, they turned a blind eye, because when you went through the gate, all the workers coming and going, for different shifts, they would always check, look at papers, they would count. But at that time, they weren't doing anything like that, because they knew that people were returning, and they turned a blind eye. And when they thought everybody was back, then they started rounding them up. And on one occasion, I was with my father and brother were at work. I was in the ghetto, and it was now a small ghetto, just 2 half streets. And they started searching for people who were illegal. Because they didn't have a card, a Russian card or identity card. And one day they stormed into a room where I was with my mother and sister and a lot of other people. It was very crowded. And I was in bed, but only because it was somewhere to be. We didn't even have our own beds or anything. If people were out on night shift, people could use the bed to sleep in, and things like that. because there wasn't enough room or enough beds for everybody. And well, they stormed into a room where I was with my mother and sister and a lot of other people. And my mother said, well, they took everybody away, but my mother said that I wasn't well, I was in bed. And the policeman, Jewish policeman, said, that's all right, she can stay behind, but they took everybody. And my mother said to me, just stay there and tell Father what happened when he gets back from work. And they returned, my brother, and I told them, and they took these people to the synagogue, which was now a very dilapidated, the main big beautiful synagogue was now very dilapidated, had been used as stables, and they were living there under terrible conditions. It had been bombed as well, and they were adding more and more people all the time. In fact, Rina was in that synagogue as well, so she told me, I didn't know that at the time, but she escaped. Did she tell you that? So you know, well, that was the same synagogue where my mother and sister were. And after a certain time, I don't know the time scale, but on the 20th of December 1942, whenever I tell that story in schools, I always draw their attention to the fact that was 4 days before Christmas Eve. So the people who carried this out, most terrible deaths in the forest. There were killings in the forest all over Europe at that time. So they walked the first group out at sunrise, and they marched them in groups of 50. So the first group arrived at the forest. They found their communal grave ready waiting for them. They had to dig the grave for the next lot, and there were over 450 people killed in the forest. It's the most horrible death. I never describe what happened, but there are lots of books about it. So that's how I lost my mother and sister.
Well, if you weren't lying in bed, and if you weren't ill, and if that Jewish policeman wouldn't have said stay in bed, you wouldn't be here today.
No, I wouldn't. I was with my mother and sister. I wouldn't be here at all. But
when did you know that your mother and your sister weren't coming back?
As soon as they were killed, we heard about it, because all the news was coming through all the time, especially local news. There were witnesses, there were people standing watching. I mean, not Jewish people, but the Christians. Some people escaped, and some, they're just most horrific stories about those forest killings. They were doing it at that time all over Europe, and the biggest one was in Kiev.
In Babi Yar?
Babi Yar, yeah.
And when you found out, how did your father and your brother, it must have been devastating beyond belief.
We're all devastated. But things like that were happening all the time. Sometimes individual killings, they would shoot someone. Sometimes they would arrest them and have some, invent some reason to kill them. I mean, we had no rights at all. They could do what they wanted with us. It was, when I look back, we somehow kept going because we were always hopeful that it would soon finish. But little did we know it was going to go on for over 5 years.
And Marla, with food, how did you must have been, been so difficult.
We weren't so badly off when we were still in our hometown, because my father had a lot of contacts outside, and he was able to smuggle in food and have it delivered. And in fact, there's one story, I don't usually tell it because I can't tell every detail, but on one occasion my father wanted to send me outside the ghetto, and people did smuggle out and come back, and my mother was very much against it. She was very upset. She didn't want me to go, but my father said, you know, nothing will happen to her. I've got blue eyes, I had light hair, you know, not a very bright blonde, but I was fair, and I never looked Jewish. So he said, this is not risking anything. Well, anyway, I went out, I smuggled out of the ghetto with a message to a farm that were going to deliver a lot of thin flour. And because as I said, my father had these connections outside, because before the war, he was he had a flour mill in partnership with his brother and another man. But now he still had these contacts. So this stuff was being delivered. I suppose it was flour, I don't know, I saw sacks. And I went to this farm. They received me very well. They gave me a glass of milk. I sat there with them for a little while talking, and then I said, well, I'll now go back. And the men said, we're going with the goods. We're delivering this afternoon. We'll give you a lift. Well, I went on the lift, but on the way we were stopped by 2 soldiers that were patrolling. And when we were stopped, I said, I don't know where I had that, you know, that sense to sort of make a good excuse. I said that I don't know these men, I just got a lift from them. I was walking and they gave me a lift. And they said, that's all right, you can go. But they arrested them, they confiscated the goods, but at least they didn't lose their life over it or anything. But the stuff was confiscated. And it was probably flour or corn that was going to be milled, or I didn't know all the details. But that was one lucky escape, but I had many lucky escapes. Many, really. Another one was when they liquidated the ghetto altogether, and there were just 2 places. I mentioned Bugaj and Hortensia, the glass works. And there were going to be 1,100 Jews working in each. And so they had, when they were about to transfer these people, because they were building barracks, they turned it into a sort of labor camp. Can you cut that out if I lose my thing?
They were about to liquidate the ghetto.
Yes.
And
there were still some people left in the ghetto. Very few people, but a few dozen, I don't know how many, maybe 50. I just remember that line of people. And we went outside, and there were mostly women and children and a few old men, because all the workers had places. And we were standing in a column and were being deported. I don't know where to. I was towards the end of this column, and the lorries were arriving and taking people from the front, and the column was moving forward. And I looked sideways, and it was all very terrifying because the woman in front of me was hit over the head with a I think it was a revolver. She was just knocked on the head by this, a German soldier, and there were soldiers and Jewish police, and there was a great commotion and children crying and people being hit or sometimes shot. But I looked to my right and I saw a German officer who was obviously in charge. He wasn't doing anything, but he was just standing there looking. And I don't know what gave me the idea, but I stepped out of line. I went up to him. Now I could have been shot going out of line, but I reached him and I said that I've been separated from my father and brother. They're inside the ghetto. Because you see, they were deporting us, but they had a job, so they were okay. And I said, they're inside the ghetto, can I go back to them? And he was very surprised. I think he was slightly amused, and I don't know what he was thinking, but he called over a Jewish policeman and said, take her back inside the ghetto. And on the way, I said, just a minute, I've got my cousin. Because I didn't tell you that at one point, they'd killed my uncle, my Helfgott uncle, and my aunt was rounded up, and she was taken away screaming, who'll look after my child? She had a 5-year-old daughter. And it was down to me. I was the only female member of the Helfgott family left. So I was looking after her. So we were together in this line waiting to be deported. And we were standing there, but when I got out of the line, I didn't take her with me. I just went up on my own, and he said, take her back inside. And on the way, I said to the policeman, just a minute, I must get my cousin. And he said, well, you can't take her because she hasn't had permission.
And this was a Jewish policeman?
Yeah. And I said, but I can't go back without her. What do you expect me to do? Anyway, I went on and on. I wouldn't take no for an answer. And in the end, he said, quickly take her and go in. But it was a terrible dilemma for me. Because I wanted to be reunited with my brother and father. But on the other hand, how could I leave my cousin? And I had to cope with those sort of decisions.
And you were very young. You were only...
I was only 12.
12.
Yeah. And my cousin was 5. There was 7 years between us. And anyway, in the end, he let me take her back. So that was a real bit of luck, because I know what happened to the children in that. There is a memorial for them in the forest, where there's a memorial for the people who were killed. You know, the hundreds of people. There were only, I think, 36 children. It's there's a stone there for them, a memorial stone.
So, well, it's incredible that you went to ask the German.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't have done that, you and your cousin wouldn't
my cousin
survived.
survived as well. Yeah. So and then I started working in that factory. They allocated us to the plywood factory, and I started work at the age of 12, slave labourer.
And you looked after your
Yeah, but of course, because I lived in the barracks with the women, And we did shifts. There was always someone there to keep an eye on her when I wasn't there, because I was out at work every day. So, and miraculously my cousin survived. She was so small and frail, but she survived.
It's miraculous. It really, it's min hashmaim. It's a nisim. It's a miracle that
Well,
you had the
It was a miracle, and
that he agreed that you could go back as well. That the German.
yeah, I mean, I suppose that occasionally, on a sort of personal level, they had a little bit of humanity in them, because most of the time, I mean, you just get shot. If you, as fast as I reached him, I could have been shot.
And everybody who remained, they perished. All the
Well, that was the last of they were the remnants, because they had already deported 22,000 people to Treblinka. And these were people who hid themselves and returned to the ghetto. And they didn't know what to do with them, and they didn't, I mean, they knew what to do with them. They're searching for them, and they killed them in the forest.
And when you came back, your father and your brother must have been overwhelmed that you...
Well, they didn't actually know. They were inside. I don't know if they knew. I can't remember discussing it even, but we probably did. They knew that we were being deported, or maybe they were at work. I can't remember.
And Monica, can I just ask, those that were deported to Treblinka, did you have an idea that what was happening, that they...
Yeah, we knew I don't know if I knew, but I know that the adults knew a lot more than we knew. And everybody was so scared of the deportations, because we knew that Treblinka was an annihilation camp. It wasn't a labor camp. Anybody who went there, after a few hours, they were gone. So people were terrified. This is why everybody tried to find a place or somehow find a job, but most people were killed. There were only so many jobs, a couple of thousand people, and 22,000 to the gas chamber.
And how long did you stay in the ghetto?
The ghetto was dissolved after that, and by then it was 1942. No, by then it was already 1943, because 42 is when they liquidated the ghetto. 42 was when they were killed in the forest, my mother and sister. And after that, we're living in this labor camp. We just had a bunk, just one bed between us, and meager rations, and I used to go to work every day. I had a job. They were producing, first of all, they were manufacturing plywood from scratch, and then they were making sort of huts for the soldiers. They were more than huts, and they were round ones. So they did all the sections, and they were packaged and sent to the front.
And did they give you a bit more food, or did they treat you a little bit better?
No, but we had access with some people, knew people outside, and there were actually Polish people working in the same factory, but not in the same department, so we weren't together. In fact, I remember, and now I've got nobody I didn't have anybody to ask because my father didn't survive, but there were Polish people working there as well. in the factory, but not together with the Jews. They were separate. But one of the men, I don't know why or how he did it, but we got talking, and he said, he asked me if I got a mother and father, and I said, yeah, I've got a father and brother, and he said, I'd like to speak to your father. And I passed on the message, and they arranged to meet, and apparently he told my father that he wanted to save me. He was an ordinary man, a local man, and he had a son of about 18 that was working there as well. I remember the son. But it's the father who spoke to me and said, I would like to speak to your father. And he offered my father that I could come out of there and live as a Christian in his home, in his household. And my father said no, he'd rather we stayed together. So I can't remember the man's name. I don't know if I knew it at the time. I think I did. So, there were some good people who would help. I didn't even ask, no one asked for the help, but he just offered it.
It's very dangerous if it was found out.
Yeah, very unusual. And I don't think he was going to do it for money. I don't know. I don't know. My father never survived, so I couldn't ask him because he would remember that.
So what happened to your father?
Well, I didn't know for years and years after the war, but I found out that towards the end of the war, when they were doing all the death marches, my father tried to escape, and he and some other people were shot. My father was very brave, and he wasn't scared, but if he didn't try to escape, he might have survived. Lots of people didn't, but lots of people did. So.
And Marla, when did you, from there, I think you were taken to...
From there we were there for about 18 months at the factory. And from there we were sent, one day they just marched us to the railway station, men separately from women. And the men were sent to Buchenwald. I mean, we found it out later. We didn't know where we were going. No, not the men or the women. And we were sent to Ravensbrück. So I was the woman, went to Ravensbrück.
And was it at this time you were separated from your father and your brother?
Yeah, but I had my little cousin with me. I was still looking after her.
And she went with you to Ravensbrück?
Yeah, and she survived. But as a matter of fact, I'm going to visit Ravensbrück after March of the Living. When we get back to Warsaw, I'm going to take a plane to Germany. Because they're having a sort of reunion. Bergen-Belsen do it every 5 years, but I don't know, it'll be the first time that I'm invited back, because I never went back to there, whereas Bergen-Belsen, we had been going like every 5 years, but not all that long ago. And then there was this big stop during the pandemic, and now they've started again. So I did go a few months ago with my son, and meet people that I knew in the camp, or people from Piotrków or from Israel, and usually they have a good program and they look after us well. That I had never been back to Ravensbrück. And I knew that they were having reunions, but I didn't know how to contact them. I did once send them an email, but I had no response. May have gone to the wrong place. So March of the Living do, apart from the once a year event in Auschwitz, they also do other smaller things. And they organize a trip to Berlin, and then from Berlin on to Ravensbrück. And Ravensbrück they did on the strength really of me having been there. Because if people go to visit a camp, and there was someone else with them who was actually there during the war, then it takes on a different meaning altogether.
Extremely significant. Extremely.
So,
and you're going to be the guest.
Well, I wasn't. That was, I think that March of the Living wrote to them, and they organised it all. And when we got there, it was on a Sunday, and the woman who is in charge, she's the chief executive, she actually came there specially to meet me. And she showed me around and we talked and so on. But they do have these reunions. So this year I have received an invitation, an official invitation to the reunion. And I'm going straight after the March of the Living. So when the others return to England from Warsaw, I will be going to Germany, and then I'll be picked up at the airport, and it's 50 miles to the camp, but still everything will be provided for me.
And what do you remember when you entered the camp, when you were with your niece?
Well, that was really a departure from what I had been used to, what I had seen, and the type of life. It was completely different. We were now far from home, far from Piotrków, and didn't have a father and a brother anymore. I didn't know what happened to them. And when we arrived, the first thing they did was to take everything away from us. Then we had to queue up and give our names, because they were meticulous at record and keeping, and there is a record. It's actually, it's online, and I've got one on my PowerPoint. I've got it on my PowerPoint. So my name is on it, and my cousins and my aunts.
What's the name of your cousin?
In Polish we called her Hania. So, but after the war she was called Anne, because she settled in Australia, and her mother survived as well. So the next thing they did was to take everything away from us that we bought, naturally. Then we had to undress. They took our clothing away. They shaved our heads. We went through cold communal showers. And when we came out at the other end, they gave us this striped jacket and skirt. And when we looked at one another, we could not recognize each other. It was such a shock to the system. And it really does something to your soul when they strip you of your personality, your identity. So everybody was the same. You couldn't recognize people with just a lot of shaved heads. It was a most terrible feeling. And from then on, things started going downhill, because my aunt Franja Klein, my mother's sister-in-law, my mother was a Klein. She died soon after arrival. My best friend, Pema Blachman, died soon after that. And, you know, whenever I talk about them, because I speak at schools and many organizations, I always mention anybody's name that I knew that perished in the Holocaust. I always tell their name, and I often think, and I usually explain it to the children, new pupils, when I'm at schools, although I don't do so many schools these days. It's a lot of big companies, banks, or enormous companies. I explain to them that everybody thinks of the Holocaust, everybody has this image of 6 million. And how can you imagine 6 million people? I mean, it could be a country, a small country. So I usually tell them that whenever I know the name of anyone that perished in the Holocaust, I always make sure to use it. And, you know, people have sort of agreed with me, saying, yes, we should all use the names we know.
It's also for their memory. It's a blessing for their memory.
For their memory. I mean, otherwise just a mass that no one can imagine.
And it makes it very real. It's not a number.
That's right. So my aunt died, my friend died, and and I didn't work in Ravensbrück, but my aunt did, the other aunt that was there. Well, one went into hospital, the other one was working. But she was working in the fields, and one day she brought me back a carrot or something, you know, that she dug up. But, you know, she was risking her life bringing that back. And we were very grateful.
And was there also a lack of food, and was there a lot of diseases?
Food was very meager. We did get it, but it was like a slice of bread in the morning with, or half a slice. Can't remember the precise amount or anything. And some black coffee, but it wasn't real coffee. It was black, and then, but I don't know what we got lunchtime, I can't remember now, because I know that we got our soup in the evening. That was our meal.
Marla, was there a lot of typhus or a lot of diseases?
Well, in the soup?
No, in the camp, where did people die from diseases, from?
I think, I really didn't know what was going on there precisely at the time, because you didn't know what was happening in another barracks. You only knew your own, and it's just one barracks.
How did your aunt die? Where did she die from?
I don't know. She was in hospital for a while before she died. But I don't know what the condition was. When I visited there last time, I asked for the record. When did she die, and what was wrong with her? And they took ages to look for it, and I never got it. I'm going to ask again this time. Because her son, my cousin, is still alive. He lives in Israel. And we sometimes speak about it. He said he tried to find out, but he didn't. But usually they're so good at record keeping, aren't they?
They were precise. They were very pedantic with their records. The Germans were exact.
Yeah, absolutely. The best recorded atrocity.
And how long did you stay in Ravensbrück?
How many?
How long were you there? How long did you stay?
We were there between 2.5 and 3 months when they deported us to Bergen-Belsen. And arriving in Bergen-Belsen after Ravensbrück was like a different world, because everything was orderly, and we had to be on the what they call it in German, Platz, It was like roll call in English, but Appellplatz. And we had to be on it either 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember the 6, but someone told me no, it was 5. I must find out when I go there this time. And we stood there for what seemed like hours, because they did recount and they went off to have a coffee and they came back. And I don't know, we just stood there freezing. And I mean, they gave us this hardly anything to wear. We had to leave all our clothing that we came in. And they gave us this, I mean, a little thin jacket, not even lined. And I don't know, something underneath it. I can't remember all the details now, but it was awful. But when we got to Bergen-Belsen, then it made Ravensbrück feel like we thought we were really well off there, because everything was very orderly and to time, and the barracks were quiet. We were four to a bed, you know, to one layer. We nearly always had the bottom one because of the little child. Well, I wasn't that much bigger, but still I was 14, just turned 14 when I arrived there.
And you came with your
My cousin, of course, yeah. She survived the war.
And you looked after her all the time?
Yeah. She was with me. So we were there, and when we arrived at Bergen-Belsen, well, that was indescribable what was happening there. We had 4.5 hour journey from Piotrków to Ravensbrück. 4.5 days. It was no food, in terrible condition, cattle trucks sitting on the ground. It was awful. A lot of people didn't survive the journey. It was such a long way. And but then when we went to Bergen-Belsen, it was a shorter journey, but what we found there was just unbelievable. First of all, when we arrived, they didn't have room for us. It was very overcrowded. And they put us up in a tent outside. And it was so very large tent with so many people. I don't know how many people there were, but it was an enormous place, and there were from all over Europe, all different languages spoken. And we stayed there overnight, and then we went in the morning. And the scene in Bergen-Belsen was so different from Ravensbrück. The first thing that hit you was the smell and the smog. And there were people there, but there were skeletons. And they were just shuffling along aimlessly. And as they were shuffling, they were like zombies. And as they were shuffling, they'd collapse and die. And there were dead bodies everywhere. It was strewn around with dead bodies. And there were piles of bodies as well, because they did try to pile them up, but they couldn't keep up with it. People were dying like flies. And the piles of bodies, and they were rotting, and they just looked terrible, and they were all over the place and in piles. And then as they were going to lead us to some barracks, which were also so overcrowded, I don't know where they were going to put us. But on the way I heard that there was a children's home somewhere in the barracks. And I set out to find it. It was my little cousin. And we found these two women, Sister Luba and Dr. Bimko. And they questioned us. They asked a lot of questions. And after a time, one of them turned to me and said, well, we are also very overcrowded, but in any case, you are too old, she said to me, because I was 14. And I said, okay, will you take my cousin? And they said, yes, we were going to keep her anyway, because she was so small and frail. And but the thing is that my cousin wouldn't leave me. She was so terrified of losing me that she wouldn't leave me. When I went to the toilet, she would come with me and wait for me. And anyway, they could see she wouldn't leave me, and in the end they decided to take us both. So, because they would have taken her. But, and that was a real bit of luck, because we wouldn't have survived on the main camp. Terrible, terrible camp.
And they were good to you. The Sister Luba,
Well, Luba, and yes, Sister Luba was the head, and she had a lot of others. We called them all sisters. There was a Sister Hermina and Sister Hella.
Were they Jewish?
Yeah, they were all Jewish, I think. Yeah, I kept in touch with some of them after the war. Well, that was our lucky thing. And even there I got typhus, and people were dying of typhus all the time. And I remember lying on my upper bunk by the window, and I must have come back into consciousness. And typhus is a terrible disease. Not many people recover. And I opened my eyes and I saw people running. And I sort of remember sort of little ones running there as well. It may have been from the children's home. And I thought, I didn't know where they were running or why they were running. But the only thing that interested me was how had they got the strength to run? Because that terrible disease, typhus, is so debilitating. You really can't move a muscle. And that was the 15th of April, 1945, when we were liberated by the British soldiers. And they were absolutely amazing. They were so good at everything they did for us.
And you remember that day? You remember when you were liberated?
Well, I didn't know anything that was going on outside. I only remember those people running to the gate. They weren't running fast, but they were running to the gate, and I remember some small children there with them. And I don't remember a lot else, because they emptied the barracks, and they had to prepare beds, and they had a terrible job on their hands. But I was there for another 2 days, and it was already empty, but I had to go to a hospital. I couldn't go to a different barracks. So when they came back for me 2 days later with a stretcher, 2 soldiers and a stretcher, and I said, oh, that's all right, I don't need the stretcher, I'll walk. I have to laugh when I even think about it now, my optimism. Maybe that's what it was that saved me, because I got out onto the floor and collapsed. So they put me on the stretcher and took me to the ambulance. And then I recovered.
And your cousin, she...
My cousin, I didn't know what was happening with my cousin, you know. We were kind of separated. I don't remember seeing her, but I knew that she had survived. I asked about her, and they said she was all right. I don't know if she also had typhus. I don't think so, because she would have been there with me, but she was... I'm not sure. She was in some other part. We weren't together. And there was a doctor. He was officer in the British Army, but he was actually from Romania. I think it was Romania or one of those countries. And he was a rabbi. And his name was Helfgott, same as mine. So he befriended us, you know, he came to see me, and he went to see my cousin. And we kept in touch until he died. He was chief rabbi of one of the towns in Germany after the war. And then he lived in Israel. Did you say you live in Israel? Well, he lived in Savion, nice area. And we visited him a couple of times. And I was in touch with his wife. She was a lot younger, so she may still be around. But he died, but he was a lovely man. He was a really nice man, and he was very much loved and respected in Israel. He was a rabbi of some area, not a chief rabbi, a chief of an area.
And Marla, can I ask, when the British soldiers, when they liberated Bergen-Belsen, a lot of, unfortunately, people overate, and their bodies couldn't take it, and people died from overeating as well.
Yes, it did happen.
Did you see, or did you witness any?
Not particularly. I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Because you were
I know that now.
You were in the hospital. You were recovering.
Well, I was in hospital, and they weren't overfeeding me, but so I was getting meals. I can't even remember getting them, but I remember the room I was in. And it was only a small room. It was, I think, for 4 people. And I because next door to the camp they had a garrison town. It was for the German soldiers. It was a whole town. It had a hospital, it had schools, and after the war, the British took it over, and they changed everything to the British way, because they were driving on the left. They changed it to the left from the right. And they took over that town, and for the inmates, for the people who were okay. And I wasn't there all that long, and I was sent to Sweden with a group of children.
Now, going to Sweden, what do you remember about the trip going to Sweden? Were you asked if you wanted to go, or
no,
they suggested?
No, they just suggested. If I didn't want to go, I mean, where would I go? I was just being directed everywhere, because I didn't have choices. I mean, what were they going to do with me? I couldn't say, well, I'd like to go to New York or something. It wouldn't have occurred to me to say that, but because in those days, we didn't travel a lot, and I really only knew Europe. And
did you know what had happened to your brother at this time?
I didn't know anything for quite a long time.
And when you went to Sweden, what happened to your cousin?
She went to Sweden as well.
So she went, so you were...
We were together, but not properly, not like before. I wasn't any longer looking after her, because they put her with a group of younger children. At liberation, she was 7 and I was 14. I was double her age. And you wouldn't have a group of children, you know, all different ages. That we sort of more or less kept in age groups.
And going to Sweden, you managed to recover. Was it a positive? Did they look after you well? Did they treat you well?
Oh yes, they were wonderful. The Swedes were really wonderful, and it was summertime. We were liberated in April, and we went to Sweden. I think it was 2 months or 4
Do you know
months later.
which town you were in Sweden?
Well, we were being transferred all the time. I knew that one was called Katrineholm, and another one was called something else, but it was holiday time. So they put us in a sort of places where there were holiday places, so we had, it was near lakes, and we were in sort of accommodation that would have been used for holidays, but not luxury holidays. But there would be, I remember we were about 4 to a room, that I suppose if people who used it for holiday there would be individual rooms. But they were very good to us.
And were there many children from all over Europe that were with you?
Yes, there were different groups, but I was with my own group. I got to know them. I didn't know some of them before, some I did. They were from my hometown. And then they started teaching us when it sort of schools started, but we were kept together and we had classes every day. It was like a boarding school in a sort of stately home, but stripped of all its beauty, but it was a home for children. And I have learned later that they were keeping Israel, which wasn't Israel yet. They wanted all the young people desperately, teenagers, because they wanted them for Israel. You know, they were fighting for Israel. And most of them did go to Israel. I would have gone to Israel. When we were being taught, we developed such a almost longing for Israel, because they needed us. They wanted to populate the place. I mean, this is all hindsight, I realize now, but I didn't know that was their intention. But I know we were learning Hebrew. We could all speak Hebrew, and they weren't teaching us Swedish. And I think that was deliberate. They didn't want us to stay there.
And what languages did you speak at home?
We spoke Polish, and my parents spoke Yiddish.
And Yiddish? Could you understand Yiddish?
Yeah.
And German?
Yes, because very, very much like Yiddish.
So because you understood German, or you could speak German, that saved your life when you asked the German. So
yeah, I could speak enough for that, yes. But since then I've studied German. It was part of my A-levels in England. I mean, after my children grew up and I started studying, and I've got a degree.
How long did you stay in
Sweden? Nearly 2 years.
And were you a lot in touch with your cousin during this time? Did you see each other?
We were writing to one another, because she then went to another place with children her age.
Could you visit each other? Or?
I can't remember visiting. I don't think so. But some years later, in recent years, I got a communication from someone in Israel. Now I can't remember his name, but he got my name through something he saw where I was speaking. He recognized the name, and he wrote to an organization to say that he wants to get in touch with me. And he said that he's got a lot of photographs of the children, and that he would like to meet me when I come to Israel next time. But in fact, we organized a trip, I say we, my brother and sister-in-law came. I think it was combined with something else we were doing as well. And this young man, he had sent me the photographs even before I went there. Or I can't remember if he gave them to me there or he sent them to me. And they had my cousin on it. And he had a lot of stuff about my cousin, the little girl. And you know, I was very interested to look at them because she, you know, I wanted to see how she looked. And, you know, she looked happy to be with all these other children. I think once the war was finished, she shed that fear that she had during the war. And I could see that was borne out in these pictures that I got of her with other children. So that was years later. I mean, by then she was an adult and she was living in Australia and had children and grandchildren. But it was interesting to meet up. We had a meeting. My brother, I think, was going to Israel anyway with my sister-in-law, and I went. I think we may have had some event as well, and it was interesting. The young man, whose name I cannot remember, he was just at the point of becoming a judge. And when we left, I mean, he had his first sort of court case like the following week. He's a very bright young man. I can't remember his name. He became a judge. But he was an Israeli who had some connection to this group. And they arranged a meeting in somebody's house, that somebody was from my hometown. And he was actually the mayor of, I know the place very well, but I can't, not far from Herzliya. He was the mayor of quite a well-known small town. I think you're perhaps a year too late for all my memories.
No, you're amazing. But the many, like Netanya, Kadera, there's quite a few towns near Herzliya.
Yeah, I know, it wasn't Netanya. If I looked at the map, because it was well-known, very lovely small town, not far from Herzliya, because we were staying in Herzliya.
Did he have pictures of you as well?
No. He just had ones of my cousin with other children, because she was in a different place.
When did you first find out that your brother had survived?
I don't know the date, but it was quite a longish time.
Were you in Sweden when you found out?
I was in Sweden, yeah. And he wrote to me.
Okay, so this is very significant. When you found out for the first time that your brother had survived, how was your emotions? You must have been...
Well, the first letter I received from him, I remember we were living it was like a boarding school. And it was like, I think I mentioned it before, like a stately home stripped of its beauty, but lots of grounds. And I got a letter from my brother. I read it, and then I went outside into the grounds. I was holding it up, saying, I've got a letter from my brother, running through the grounds with this letter. It was so exciting.
Did you know before you got the letter that your brother had survived?
Yes, I had heard that he survived, but not immediately. I mean, quite a long time after. I think he knew about me before I knew about him. But he couldn't make contact until he found the right people, because he didn't know where I was. And even if he knew I was in Sweden is a big place. But it all sort of worked out
And when did you see your brother for the first time after the war?
when I came to England.
Was that straight after from Sweden?
From Sweden, but it was, I had been in Sweden nearly 2 years before I came to England. And I hadn't seen him since the time that we were deported to Ravensbrück. And that was towards the end of 44. It was sort of nearing the end of the war already. Because I know it was November, I remember the date. Ben, my brother, remembered everything. He had a wonderful memory, but not now. So it was to about the 27th of November, I seem to remember, we were deported from Poland, from Piotrków to Ravensbrück. So it was already near then, but we didn't know that. Probably that's why we were being deported, because later on they didn't have enough transport and people were marching, weren't they? They were the death marchers, all going towards Germany. It's funny, they were taking the Jews with them. They couldn't bear to leave them, the Germans, but for only one purpose. They said they couldn't kill them there, so they'll do it.
And Lola, after you received the letter, how soon afterwards did you go to England? Was it very soon after?
Well, I didn't go to England till nearly after about 2 years that I'd spent in Sweden. It was about 22 months.
And when you received the letter, or when you got notification that your brother had survived, was this in the middle of when you were in those 2 years, or?
Yeah, that was in the second part of the 2 years.
So you must have been longing to go and see him.
Yes. Well, we were corresponding. We were writing ever such a lot to one another.
And he was one of the Windermere boys. He was one of the very famous.
Yeah.
And how did you get to England? Who brought you over?
Well, there's an organisation, still exists. They were formed when Hitler came to power. They set up an organisation in this country, the Jewish organisation. It was called the Central British Fund. And they were the ones who welcomed the German Jews and the kinder transport and anybody who came to England, and that was before the war. But they started in 1933, that's when the organisation started. And they found, and when I came, they looked after the boys when they came, but when I came, I was on my own from Sweden, and they still looked after me. They had an office in town near Holborn in Bloomsbury House, and I had a correspondence. I was corresponding with them, and all this was kept for 50 years. You mustn't release it, but now it's all been released. I mean, not to the public, but I've got a copy of my correspondence with them when I came to England.
And did you know a little bit of English? Had you learned?
Well, we were learning English, among other subjects. But I thought I knew, but because my brother laughed at me when I tried to speak it. I mean, if you're living here, it's a different matter, isn't it? Knowing, but I was learning one of the languages, yeah.
And when you came to England, you came by yourself?
I came by myself, by boat.
So you were still very young. You were...
Well, I came in 1947. I was 16 when I came here. 16 and a half.
And when you came Who put you up, or who helped
Well,
you?
it was this committee. They were absolutely wonderful. They put me up in a place in Maida Vale, which incidentally now it's a very posh area, and wasn't bad then. But they had already all the other children. They had hostels and individual places. And there was, in Maida Vale, there was a girl who, they were lodging with a woman, Mrs. Neuberger, and there were two boys, two brothers, and they had a sister. So they occupied 2 bedrooms, 2 brothers in a double bedroom and a sister in a single room. But she had been ill, she had appendix removed, and in those days people used to always go on convalescent after an operation. So she was convalescing in Blackpool. Blackpool is a lovely seaside. And they said to me, you can have her room, and by the time she comes back, she was going to be away 2 weeks, they will find me another room. But when she came back, they hadn't yet found me a room, and there was a couch in her room. So I was temporarily on the couch, but I was there for quite a long time, and eventually I changed when I had sort of more freedom to choose or to do things. I said that I'd like to move somewhere else. I moved to a sort of suburb, a bit out, and that girl still stayed there, but not for long, because she had a family in America who were trying to get her over, her and the 2 brothers, and they all emigrated eventually. And I was living in Geary Road in Doris Hill. So with a Jewish couple who didn't have any children, but I mean they weren't adopting me or anything. But by then I was working and I was paying my way.
And when did you first see your brother? When you arrived in England?
Well, at the boat. He came to meet me.
He came to see you at the boat?
Yes, he came with a friend. One of the other boys was from my hometown.
Can you, I'm sure you remember that encounter. It must be
yes.
very vivid.
It was amazing, but people would ask me to describe it. I can't describe it, but in actual fact, we had been corresponding for over a year. So it wasn't like something that I'd just learned. It's when I learned, that was the big event, when I heard that he's alive and he's here. But after that, we met, and people always say, well, describe that. Well, we weren't jumping up and down or anything, but we're obviously emotionally very stirred.
And you kept a close connection all the years?
Sorry?
You were very close all the years. You've remained close.
Yes, because we both lived in London. I got married quite early. After 3 years in England, I got married. And Ben didn't get married till much later, because he was very busy with all his sporting event.
Was
and
he
but he was an Olympian. He represented Great Britain at the Olympics. I mean, that's so amazing and so meaningful. Not once, but twice.
And he was knighted.
And before, well, he's now over 90, yes.
But the Queen...
Oh, 90.
He was knighted?
Yes. Yes, he's Ben Helfgott. Yes.
Did you go to the ceremony as well, or could you attend?
No, because they limit you. I mean, I also got a recognition, but nothing like that. I've got an MBE, and you only limit it to 4 people, I think. So if you've got 2 children, that's all right, but he's got 3 children, so he was already over the top. But and the 3 managed to go. I don't know how, but they managed to go, all of them. But when he came out, we had a celebration. With,
You must have been so
dinner.
proud. And when he represented England in the Olympic Games,
It's amazing. He had such wonderful publicity. And I remember the words of one particular paper, I think it was the Times, but I'm not sure. They were writing about the Olympics, and they said, one of them, the reporters said, and the men we would most like to see on the, not platform,
Podium.
I can't remember, podium, that's the word. On the podium is Ben Helfgott. I mean, he didn't get gold or anything. He didn't get anything because actually, you know, after the war, the first one was in 1956. Wasn't long after the war, and I went some years ago. Not all that long ago. We had Olympics here in this country. I think 2012, and there was a lot of razzmatazz. They went very well, and Ben had a what's name ticket when you can go anytime. What do you call the
a
ticket?
VIP, it's a VIP.
Oh, he was a VIP, absolutely, and he had like a daily ticket. He could go into anything, anytime. And
It's a free pass, like a free pass.
yeah, free pass, absolutely. And we were all excited, and I'm just trying to remember what I wanted to tell you about him. Oh yes, it was about something else. I was at that time working for Ajax. I was volunteering. I looked after their database, and a man came to Ajax who had taken who was in the first Olympics in Britain after the war. They had Olympics when about a year or two after I came to England, and I was living on that line that went to Wembley Stadium on the underground. This Wembley Park is where the stadium was, and there's still a very big stadium there now, and I used to see all these people traveling to the Olympics on the underground and back. Things have changed. Now they have limousines to pick them up, and this man came to Ajax, that's the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen, to tell us about the Olympic Games that he took part in. And he brought the things that they were issued with, and there was a pair of shorts, very flimsy shorts, I don't know, a pair of socks. I mean, it's practically nothing. And that was just after the war, and Britain couldn't afford to even do the Olympics. I don't know how they did them so soon after the war. And when you compare it and when my brother, I don't know what he was issued with, I'm sure it was all very nice, and he was the one to carry the flag when they were sort of going into, when he was in the Olympics. He was the leader with the British flag, taking in the British team. They always gave him all the honours because he was very likable, and had a very good relationship with all his fellow competitors. So I don't know what I was going to actually tell you specifically about that, but that was in 56. In 56, already things were rising. But when people ask me, well, what did he win? Did he win gold or silver? You know, at that time, when Britain and a lot of Europe was still recovering from the war, they hadn't really got back on their feet completely yet. They were, and even if they were doing okay. But the people, the competitors, didn't have any special time off for their training.
They weren't professional. They did it
Yes.
voluntary as amateurs.
But Russia and America, their people, they had all the time they wanted, day and night, every day, whereas people here had to go to work and they could only practice in their spare time. So it was always much harder here because they're like professionals, they're paid and given such amazing things. Today it's more and more, and I think it applies to the British as well. But in those days, Britain was recovering from the war for a long time.
Marla, to see your brother carrying the flag and that's the highest honor you can give a team member
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
the Olympic team.
he was very popular. He was very popular with the team, and you know, he was very friendly with the Israeli team of weightlifters. And he was in Munich when they were killed. He didn't take part in the Olympics, but after he did take part, he went to almost all the every 4 years when there was Olympic Games, wherever it was in the world, he would go. And he was in Rome, was it? No, it wasn't. Ben competed in Munich. Yes, he was there, and he was with them till very late in their room, one of their rooms. They all gathered because he used to meet them every 4 years. Even after he didn't do the Olympics, he still went to the Olympics.
So in that Olympic village, he was in their room.
Well, it was in Munich. They were in buildings, and here, you know, the villages were early on, but now they had, you know, here, but they would, what's it called, that part, something land. Here they built lots of flats for the Olympic.
It was the Olympic village. Marla, can I just ask, where did your husband come from?
He was born here.
And his surname's from
Yeah, but
Czechoslovakia?
his father was born in Krakow, but then Poland didn't exist. There was a time when Poland didn't exist, and it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they were taking bits of Poland until there was nothing left. And when he lived there, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he used to talk about it to us quite a lot. That we were young, I was young and foolish, we only listened, it was half a year. You know, we didn't, I wish he was around now and I would really listen very attentively. But he used to tell us lots of amazing stories about Prince something, I can't remember any of it.
But they came to England before the war.
His father came, in the end of 1918. That's a very long time ago. No, 1800, the end of 1800. His mother was born here.
And Marla, can I just ask, when you got married, did you discuss your experiences with your husband?
Never.
See this?
But I'm not with my children.
You never discussed?
No.
But with your husband?
But
did he ask? Did he?
Well, when it came up, it's more in general terms. They somehow, all my family knew, but we never actually discussed it, unless it was relevant to something that's just happened.
Your husband knew before he married that you were a survivor. He knew.
Oh, yes.
Did he ever want to ask details of how you survived and what happened to your
Well,
family?
no, he didn't ask, but we did talk about it sometimes, yes. Because It's just a subject people occasionally talk about.
And with your children, did you ever discuss with your children when they were growing up?
No, we didn't talk about it. We talked about if something happened and it was sort of relevant to the news or some discussion, or we would go to things that were of interest to do with it. No, we didn't. I think that the way we dealt with it and lived our lives was the way that somehow was right for us. I don't know, there were families who were absolutely steeped in this and they lived it all the time. But I had a busy life and I had family and friends and events, and I was on various committees, and no one really talked about it. You think probably that that's strange.
No, but if your children asked you, you would tell them?
Oh yes, if they asked me, I would tell them. I wouldn't tell them anything terribly atrocious, because I wouldn't want to upset them.
And when did you start speaking publicly? Oh.
And that's another thing that's, you see, people didn't speak about it. And people often say, well, when did you start? When did the whole discussion start? And I think it was, you may not remember it, because I don't know, how long have you been involved in it, in sort of following it? And
all our lives, our family was very steeped in Jewish history, but
yeah.
I know from Israel and the people I've spoken to, before the Eichmann trial, people didn't want to speak. And when the Eichmann trial happened, only after the Eichmann trial, it changed things. People then opened up, and it happened in 1960. Eichmann was captured in Argentina, and the Mossad, they brought him back to Israel, and the trial started from the 11th of April 61, and it lasted till the 15th of December 61.
April till December?
In 1961.
So that's like 8 months.
And from that trial, when you had survivors speaking, and it was televised all over the world, and it was tremendous publicity.
I remember, we listened to it every day.
People started then opening up, and did that have a very big impact on you? Also, in
this country, oh yes, it had an impact on all of us. I'll show you that later, but I can tell you that in, was it 61, I said? That wasn't the trial.
The trial was in 61.
61,
Eichmann was captured in 60.
So, wait a minute.
But I think the reunion was in 81. It was 20 years later. I think they had a very large Holocaust
from all over the world, yeah. But I know how I'll know the date. It was 36 years after the war. So 45 and 36, 45, 51, 81.
81, it was 1981.
Yeah, 1981. And when was the trial?
In 1961.
Oh, it was 20 years before. Well,
and you attended the reunion?
Yeah, I was there with my husband.
I think Elie Wiesel was there.
Who?
Elie Wiesel.
Yes, yeah. All the top people were there, but there were people from all over the country, all over the world, and it was really well attended. They were reporting on it all the time, and of course they said that some people met there, that one didn't know the other one survived the war. and some siblings met. There were different parts of the world. One didn't know the other one survived. And there were lots of things in the paper, and the whole Israel was buzzing with this. And I remember, but because they were holding it in all different halls, they built some of the halls. One hall they built for that in Jerusalem, really huge.
It's Binyana Ha'oma, the main exhibition hall. Binyana Ha'oma.
Which?
Binyana Ha'oma.
Yeah, Binyane, but it sounded...
Ha'oma.
Ha'oma?
It's the main hall in Jerusalem.
Yeah, well that's when
it's
it
the convention
built.
center. It became the main convention center.
Yeah, well they built it there for that, on that occasion, before that. And it was, the whole of Israel was buzzing, and they had special computers, and people were asking, look up this one, or what happened to that one, and it was all very exciting. And we had a Zionist society we belonged to, a very sort of active group, and a friend of mine in the Zionist society said, when you go, take notes so you can tell us about it when you come back. And I said, oh no, you can speak to it, to speak to us. I said, no, I couldn't speak to a group of people. Well, we're just friends in somebody's lounge when we meet, you tell us about it. I said, no, I won't talk about it, but she said, take notes just the same. So I did, and and I typed them out when I came back. My husband said, why don't you type them out and be all clear? And they did arrange a meeting, but they had the foresight to book a hall. It wasn't a very big hall, not far from here, Tally Ho Corner, North Finchley. They had the Zionist Federation there then, and they had various halls and offices, and they booked a hall there. It was like a small hall, not a big hall. And normally we would have like 30 people turn up to a meeting. That would be a good meeting. But it was something special, there were always more. But this one, nearly 100 people turned up. There was such interest. And I remember one friend saying to me, Marla, I have known you for so long, but I've never heard your story. So I said, well, you won't hear it today either, because I'm going to talk about the reunion, not about my story. Anyway, I did talk about the reunion, but of course people asked me, and I told them, and a friend who was with us for a long, while we were there, she came to this reunion, and here, not reunion, but she came to the meeting, so she talked. She was actually French, and so she talked about it quite a lot as well. But we had a very big meeting, and everybody was very interested, and that's when, and I think the sort of general speaking started from then. It was something that sort of grew gradually. It wasn't, it didn't just come up like that. It took time. And it's when we started speaking to schools, because it was on the curriculum, that's when it really spread. But when it started, I was going to say something very specific. Yeah, it was on the curriculum, but now it is compulsory on the curriculum. You can have something on the curriculum, but if it's not compulsory, they don't have to teach it, because they have a choice of teaching things. So now it is compulsory, so all children learn about it. They all have speakers in, and they have sort of, a lot of the speakers now they give them a special name. They're not survivors necessarily. There aren't that many survivors around.
And Marla, when you were recognized by the royal family and you got the
MBE.
Can you tell us a little bit about that occasion?
Well, it's just always very exciting to meet the Queen. And you see, she didn't always give all the honours. So, because she needed help, because every month or whatever it takes place in the palace, but she did mine. I mean, she did that particular date. So, well, it was just very exciting. It was exciting to be in the palace, and the Queen was interested. She asked me about, my speaking to schools. She was briefed, no doubt, about everything. But it was a very special occasion, so being in the palace, and recently people have had to travel to Windsor, but this was London, so it was very convenient. And I feel
it's a tremendous
humble.
honour, and it's a very well-earned honour that you received.
Yeah. Well, I think I hope mine was well. I know it was, because quite honestly, I put so much effort into this, because I get a lot of requests, and I'm really always very busy.
And while it's amazing that you're going to the March of the Living after Pesach,
yeah,
which is quite incredible, because it's not a simple thing to do.
No, but you know why I go? It's not so much have you been to the March of the Living? So you don't really march. You go at your own pace. And they really need... Our March of the Living is very well organized. They're a marvelous organization, and they concentrate on youth. There are buses with, all different ages, but youth is very important, and they make it cheap enough for the young people to afford it, and if those who can't, they let them go without, or they get it funded. They really concentrate on the young people, but we have all ages anyway. And lately we've also got the clergy from all different religions. They come, and they're just so amazed. They come back transformed. So March of the Living are doing a very good job.
And in Israel, a lot of the school children, my eldest daughter went on it with the school that they go.
Yeah.
And many times the survivor accompanies the school children when they go.
Yes,
and it leaves an indelible impression, a tremendous impression on whoever goes. You're never the same after you've been.
Well, here, the person in charge, he started it. We didn't have March of the Living until about 10 years ago. And there was somebody called Scott Saunders, who was living, he was a Londoner, but he was living with his family in the Far East. Was it Far East? Where was he? Hong Kong, and around that area, different countries. And he was working there. He was there with his family, but eventually he came back to England. But while he was there, he tells the story, and it is someone he had met in shul, and he didn't know this man's history until after he died, because he never talked about it. Anyway, that's a story in itself that he tells. It's an amazing story. But he became very interested, in the Shoah, and he started coming from Hong Kong to the March of the Living here in Europe. And he was coming, and sometimes Chinese people will accompany him. They were interested to come. And eventually he moved back here with his family. And he lives in Hendon. And he started March of the Living. He is the one who started it about 11 years ago.
And Marla, when was the first time that you went back to Poland?
Oh, that's another story in itself. Because, you know, after the war, I didn't go back, and it's as if Poland didn't exist. It was like another time, another life, another era, and it was just, I didn't even think about it very much. And then one day I did, and I thought, I started longing to go back to Poland. I really wanted to go back, because suddenly I thought I could get a plane in a couple of hours. I am there. I can walk in Piotrków and look where I went to school, remember all the, you know, all my family. I mean, I can remember them anywhere, but much more meaningful in Piotrków. And I really longed to go. So we arranged a little trip, my brother and his wife, and us, and there were, some of the boys were from Piotrków, and some of them went with their wives. We're a very small group, just did it all privately. So we stayed in Warsaw, and then...
What year was this?
Hmm?
What year, roughly, was this?
I can't remember what
Was
year
it
it was.
many years ago?
Oh yes, many years ago. I really can't remember the year. But it was before March of the Living, before anything, before it got so busy with the Holocaust.
And were you nervous to go back? Were you...
No, I was longing to go back.
And your brother as well? He felt
well,
the same?
he had been back along, because he used to go to all the sporting events as an athlete. Not just the Olympics, but he went to international things in sport. So one day I thought, well, if I get on a plane in 2 hours, I'll see my school, I'll see where I live. And I was really longing to go suddenly. And we went. We're a very small group. We stayed in Warsaw. We went to Piotrków on Sunday, which was absolutely the wrong time to go, because the Poles are very frum, you know, and they were all in church, hardly anybody on the streets. It was all dead. It was drizzling. Mind you, 1 or 2 people recognized us and actually said hello. And it wasn't really very fulfilling.
Did you go back to your home?
Well, we went back to where we lived, yes, but not... I
still
can't
exists?
remember if we actually knocked on the door for them to let, but we did subsequently. So it was not as fulfilling as I thought, and I wanted to go back. But in the meantime, my cousin in Australia decided that they wanted to go to Poland, so they came here, and her husband came from another place that he was going to visit, and his sister came, and we went together. And I think it was purely by accident. There was actually a big meeting in Piotrków from Israel and other parts as well, and I met people that I hadn't seen for years, and they were surprised to see me, and I was surprised to see them, and we're all very emotional. It really was very, very special. and I got my birth certificate, and my sisters, and it was really amazing. But more recently I have been going with groups. So I went twice this year, no, last year and beginning of this year. And it's a particular group, and they usually take about 50 people. But no, they don't always get 50 people. It's called J-Roots.
J-Roots, yeah.
Do you know about J-Roots? Well, when they say, sometimes, even though I'm not going to go, they say, well, maybe you'll go. We'll put your name down. Do you mind if we do that? I said, all right, but I mean, I really hadn't intended to go. And I think that my name gets the people,
Sure.
because they happen to know me. If they don't know me, it wouldn't. But so I built up a reputation, and I was there very recently, so I made another 50 friends. And they're lovely people. They come from different sort of communities in not far away from one another, different synagogues.
And Mara, when have you met with Rabbi Lau?
I have on March of the Living, and I've gone up and said hello, but you know, when he is around, everybody wants to go and say hello, and he doesn't know the people. Sometimes he does, and he knows Ben, my brother. I don't know that he knows me, but on one occasion I went up. I said, you know, I'm from Piotrków and my name is Mara Helfgott. I wouldn't say Tribich, wouldn't mean anything. So, you know, oh yes, very nice, it's all okay. But I've stopped doing it because he's usually besieged by people. And I thought, well, you know, I know him, and I knew him when he was that big.
And what, have you been back to Shestakova?
I have, with J-Roots actually. It's a lovely town, but I don't know the address where I stayed, and it was on the outskirts anyway. And
They have a Jewish museum.
Is there a Jewish
There's a
museum?
Jewish museum that we
Have
went
you
to.
been?
Yeah, and there's a Jewish museum.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And there was once there was a prominent Jewish community there once. And there's survivors in Israel from Shestakova.
Well, I've got a friend who is from Częstochowa. We were in Sweden together, and I still keep in touch. I'm going to phone her, because she never phones me, but every time I phone I think, well, is she still around? But I'll find out. I'm going to phone her.
Well,
In Israel. She lives in Ashkelon.
Mala, I must mention that there are really no words to thank you, because you are such an example. You're amazing. There are no words, really. You must continue.
Well, nice of you to say that.
No, really, you must continue just such important work that you do, and by your example. And you mentioned that if your name's there, people will come, because it's true. People.
Well, you know, I've sort of got a reputation just this particular group, but I have to tell you about my friend in Częstochowa. Her name is Dvora, and I told her, you know, I'm going to Poland, to visit Poland. She said, Poland? She said, she put her hand on her heart, and she said, I would never go to Poland. So I thought, well, but I feel the need to go. I want to go. Anyway, some years later, she says, you know, I'm going to Częstochowa with my family. I said, what? You said you would never go? And she said, and she's a very clever woman, so she said, when I said I wouldn't go, that's when I wouldn't go. But now I want to go, and I'm going. So, and you know, I sometimes quote this, and I suppose this fits into that quote, and that there is a time for everything. And there's time to go, and there's time not to go. And I often quoted, there is a time for everything. I can't remember about which particular thing I quoted on, but there's so much to say that, you know, sometimes tell them this, and because you can't get everything in every time when I speak to groups or schools or whatever.
And Marty, if I could ask you, what message do you impart, and I'm sure everybody asks you because it's so important, but what message do you impart to your children and grandchildren and to the future generations?
Well, I'm always mostly asked at school to give a message. And, well, that we must prevent at all costs all the discrimination and the prevent all the terrible things that are happening everywhere, and we must just learn to live with one another in harmony. And as I really can't help quoting our last chief rabbi, not the current one,
Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs.
Yes, Jonathan, he was an amazing man. And he once said, you know, we've only got this one planet and we must learn to live in harmony on it.
That's wonderful. So Marla, I want to thank you. I want to just...
Oh, you have a little exercise because...
Marla, I must mention, I am so grateful to you from the bottom of my heart. Like I said, there are no words to describe.
Well,
you are an example for all of us to, please God, emulate. You are amazing beyond belief because what you've gone through, the miracles, and you're so positive and you're so active. And for me, it's been the greatest honor and privilege really to be here in your home. And I will be eternally grateful to you because I really... it's been such a privilege, really.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I was so reluctant at first.
No, Marla,
I know what you're doing.
You must just
is
be
amazing.
well. Marla, you must, I'd maybe in good health, and please God, your brother should be well, and just have nachas from your family, and just know how dear you are to all of us, to everybody, Jews, non-Jews, to all of us. Your message of reconciliation, of living together in harmony. It resounds, it has such an impact on all of us. Please God, everybody should hear your message. And we're all inspired by you.
I really want you to see my husband since I've got it here. And I can't remember the page. I thought it was 56. Where is the index?
Well, if you can in the meantime show this is...
Oh yes, was the prince.
Who's going to be the king?
Oh, the king. He was already the king. He wasn't the prince.
So this is with
It was with the king.
And his grandmother was Chasidei Matalam. His grandmother...
Oh, yes. She was amazing, wasn't she?
That's, I think, Princess Alice.
Yeah. Here he is, Morris Tribich. I'll show you. Now, part of his action was in the Middle East, and this was in Iraq. And so some people are surprised he's wearing shorts, but he said the temperature there was 120 in the shade.
Sure.
So there is Morris Tribich.
And how many years were you married?
Not long enough. He died after we were married 43 years.
33.
And that's a long time ago. Yes, it's about 30 years since he died.
And Marla, here's a picture of the March of the Living.
Oh yes. We will get one this year. This is last year's. So these are, I think, all the survivors on there. Yes, you see, the organisers have got a problem because they haven't got enough survivors for each coach. They like to have a survivor on each bus, they call it. Oh look, he's always showing his number. I don't, most photographs that you see of him, he's showing his number.
And Marla, where are you in the picture?
Yeah, I'm here, walking.
And Marla, here are two pictures of your parents, which are so special.
Oh, some people have lots of pictures, but I mean, we've got nothing. We had nothing of my cousin, my sister. But you see, this one, my mother sent to her cousin in Palestine before the war.
And that's how the picture survived.
And that's how that picture survived. But I don't know how this, I think, must have been a passport photograph, because you can see this one is a really nice photo taken in a photographer's, especially. But this one, it looks like probably a passport.
But it's wonderful that you have this. It's just such a pity that you don't have a picture of your sister.
Yeah. Oh.
And her, you remember images of your sister?
That I can't remember it anymore. Just very vague, very vague. My aunt told me that she was very nice looking. She was younger than me.
And here is the family tree of your parents.
No, there is.
So Marla, here you have the original award that was given by the Queen about 12 years ago.
Yes.
One of the highest honours a British subject could ever achieve. And here you are.
Well, no, there are higher awards.
I think what you achieved is it's unbelievable. And here's the Queen Elizabeth bestowing the MBE honour to you.
Yes.
It must have been extremely emotional experience, and you did the whole community very proud, and it's so well deserving. And here we have another picture.
Yes.
And you remember that event very well.
Oh yes.
It's something you will always remember.
And we had so celebrated it with a lunch for the family on the same day.
And Molly, you've also been awarded other awards?
Well, these are very recent. They were given about 2-3 weeks ago. 9th of February. End of March. No, it's already gone. We're in April. The 9th and the 22nd of February. The two awards. In recognition of outstanding contribution to Holocaust education. Oh, that's called.
And this is from the.
And this is in Germany. It's in the castle called the Schloss Bellevue. And it's the Caron Salon. Do you know about it?
It's very big.
And it is because it was the Israelis who were doing it. It's from Israel, but I did it.
Well, Marla,
and it's the president's wife that was there to give me the award, and
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Marla, it's so well deserving.